Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Hiring Wake Up Call, the talent pipeline you wish you'd have built sooner. Joe and I have been doing this for far too long now. No, we haven't. We've only just got started, haven't we? But we are joined by the incredible Richard Rowley, who we're going to ask you to introduce yourself very shortly. But we wanted to talk about some of the challenges that we face in TA in terms of attraction and some of the all-important untapped talent pools that we can use to address some of these talent shortages that we are all facing. So, Joe, over to you, because you have brought our lovely guest Richard onto the chat today. So yeah, I want to hear more about what we're going to be discussing.
So I'm super excited because this is it's the beginning of what I will hope will be a beautiful relationship between me and Richard and Working Chance. I have recently had the absolute privilege of being appointed an ambassador, which is amazing. We've been talking for ages, haven't we, Richard? We were put in touch with one another by an incredible recruiter that I used to work for back in the day called Amy Jenick, and she connected us both. And obviously I'm all things inclusive recruitment, and it was just I'd had my eyes opened around people with criminal convictions and people that have spent time in prison by Jazz Singh originally, that I started hanging out with a couple of years ago. And I kind of realized that actually this is an area of talent that I've not brought into my training enough, and I don't talk for and advocate enough for the reasons that probably Richard will talk about. And then Amy introduced me to Richard, and we started chatting, and I'm very, very keen to really talk more about this incredible pool of talent, and to make sure that as many people understand, we break down some of the barriers, bust some of the myths, and start to see this community of women as untapped talent from a talent attraction and hiring perspective. And I'm going to do all that I can to make sure that I help Working Chance put the word out there, especially about their training, because they do some really cool stuff with employers. And I think that's really, really important, because we can't do anything off the back of a webinar, right? We need that expertise in our organisation to train our TA staff and hiring managers. So that's why I thought it'd be a perfect opportunity to bring in Richard, and he can chat to us today. Richard, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe and Sally. So quick introduction from me. So I'm Richard. I'm the Deputy Chief Exec at Working Chance. And Working Chance, we're a dedicated charity that supports women with convictions back into employment all across England and Wales.
Incredible. I would like to say at this point, if anyone's got any questions, if anyone's joining us live, I know loads of people catch this on catch up. If anyone's got any questions that they want to kind of pose to us, especially to Richard, please don't be shy. Use this as an opportunity to connect with each other. We've built a really, really amazing community in the kind of TA space around the kind of subjects that we focus on, which is around kind of skills-based hiring, inclusive processing, processes, and kind of widening these talent pools. So yeah, it's really, really great to have you with us. So yeah, please, no one be shy. And if you've got any questions, please pose them. So over to you, Joe.
Super. So I think it'd be really useful for a little bit of scene setting, and to give Sally and the audience a bit of an overview of what the landscape currently looks like for women with convictions who are trying to access employment.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so I'll give you a bit of background to the criminal justice sector, a little bit around kind of reoffending rates, employment rates, how poverty intersects into some of that stuff, just to give you a bit of a feel for things. So across England and Wales, there's 12.6 million people with a criminal record, which that equates to around a quarter of the working population. So that's a lot of people.
1 in 4.
1 in 4. So potentially, that's a lot of people that businesses might just be completely overlooking. just on the basis that they've got a previous conviction. Now, if you look at this from a business case, the cost to the state of reoffending is now in the region of around £23 billion a year.
Wow.
Now, if you let that sink in just for a second, that's not, in any business, that's not good value for money. That's a lot of money that we could put into other resources. So I think the idea is to try and move people away from that sector, move people into employment. Employment and housing are two of the biggest factors in reducing reoffending and people moving on from some of the things that have held them back. Just to set the scene a little bit more, in terms of employment rates, so women tend to have lower employment rates in comparison to men when they leave prison. So from April 23 to March 24, 6 months after being released from prison, 32% of men were in employment, compared to 17% of women into employment. Now, there's lots of reasons for that, actually. It's not quite as simple as just looking at the stats, and I'll come on to some more detail later. But if you also factor in things like poverty, for instance, so 22% of women have a persistent low income, compared to around 14% of men. So again, stark differences.
Yeah.
Black and minority ethnic women experience considerably higher rates of poverty than white women in the UK. Again, another stark reality. And then around a quarter of children, so 23% of children that grow up in single parent households, 9 in 10 of those households are headed by women. So again, a lot of the work that we do and women that we come into contact with might be lone parents. They need flexibility around some of the stuff that they're doing around employment. If I talk a little bit around some of the kind of systemic challenges, I suppose, and that'll help you to kind of understand and set the scene a little bit more, particularly around women. So if we look at things like trauma and mental health, so a couple of years ago, Prison Reform Trust said that 63% of women they surveyed in prison that were serving short sentences of 12 months or less said they had ongoing trauma, previous issues around trauma, particularly domestic violence, that they were still trying to deal with. And 62% of women reported that they have mental health problems compared with 54% of men. I'm sure both of those figures are higher. That's what's reported.
Yeah.
It's worth bearing in mind that they could actually be higher than that. And one of the biggest ones to note, I suppose, is the rate of self-harm in prison. So from March 23 to 24, the rate of self-harm for women in prison was more than 8 times than it is for men in prison, which again is a huge factor in terms of some of the stuff that women are dealing with. And again, if you think about that 17% figure of women that go into employment after release, that's because they're dealing with other things when they're getting out. Their priority very often is to get somewhere to live, get access to the kids, and start trying to deal with some of the trauma that they may have experienced as well. I think as well, just touching on prison in particular and the use of short sentences. So I think even if somebody goes to prison for a really short period, whether that's 3 months, 6 months, even a year, all of that is enough time to lose everything, lose the house, lose the kids, lose the job. So invariably, they're coming out of prison in a worse position than when they went in. And all of those things, to try and pick those things back up again, takes a significant amount of time. And employment, is absolutely central to that, alongside the housing.
And I guess it's not just as simple, is it, as getting your release date and then being able to be work ready to then just to start work within the first few months, right? There must be lots of things that need to be in place, as well as what you mentioned there, housing, childcare, back into the rhythm and routine of life. I mean, is that something that Working Chance do a lot with, to get your women back to that kind of like work ready situation?
Yeah. I mean, when women come into us, I think there's a number of factors I think that we really want to dig into. And I think some of those is around confidence and self-belief. Lots of the women that come to us will, very specifically say they want a very low-level job, even though they've got super qualifications or a great CV, lots of work experience. And that's coming very often from a place of confidence, a lack of self-belief, or somebody in the background that's saying, no, you're never going to work again, or you're never going to get the job that that you're used to having because you've got a conviction. So I think the other thing to consider with these as well is around, women's offending patterns and pathways are very different to men in the prison system. So I think, women's offending is very often linked to things like abuse, coercive control, poverty, which I know some of those things, all those complex needs absolutely are prevalent for men as well, but much more so for women in terms of what we see when women get to us after being released from prison or just coming through the criminal justice system in general. So I think when you start to think about things like stigma, and women in particular tend to face gender stigma. So they're not just judged on the fact that they've broken the law. Very often there's that sense of there's that gendered expectations around women in particular and mothers in particular. So Prison Reform Trust actually called this moralized scrutiny, where offending is viewed as breaking the social norms around that femininity and in particularly motherhood.
Interesting.
So what you tend to see is that when a mother does offend, they're often judged more harshly because they're seen as the primary carers. That it may be perceived as a failure of maternal duties, regardless of all the stuff that's going off in the background, all the context that either nobody's listening to or doesn't even get brought to the table.
I think that's such an interesting point. And I think, as you were talking then, Richard, I was just kind of visualizing these layers upon layers upon layers. We talk about intersectionality quite a lot in the inclusion world. But you're right. I've been coaching women in their careers for, my goodness, near on 20 years. And, none of them are actually disclosed or not whether they have a conviction, but the barriers that I hear are all centered around kind of, limiting beliefs, maybe hidden disabilities, maybe they've had some time out through childcare. And, I can only imagine then the impact that having the stigma that's attached to having a conviction, what havoc that must play with these women in terms of their kind of own beliefs and the role that the media plays in that as well. I think you're right, to say that, I can see it play out in terms of women would face a more harsher judgment, if that's the right word, than potentially male counterparts. And what role does the media play in this?
I think, one of the biggest challenges, I suppose, for people with convictions in general is trying to overcome those misconceptions and that stigma that's attached to it. And again, as I said there, for women in particular, the media often perpetuates that whole kind of cycle. So my advice to employers is just ignore the noise. You've got to have the right processes in place, focus on the individual, look at the person that's sat in front of you in terms of their skills, their experience, their ability to do the job, and try and block out some of that stuff in the background from the media. Having a conviction doesn't mean that as an employer you can't employ somebody.
Yeah.
And the context, as I said before, is really key around making sure that you're taking into account the journey that somebody's been on. It's not quite as simple as what's in black and white on a DBS. It's all of that information that goes behind that led somebody to that. And I think, thinking about trauma again, and about coercive control and how some women have ended up in that cycle, and that's not an excuse, but it's really important context for an employer to understand. And I would say to any employer that when you're sat in front of somebody, don't make those assumptions. If you've got questions, if you've got clarifications, ask those questions if it's appropriate to do so, but don't make assumptions.
And on that, Richard, I'm sure there'll be many people that watch this either live or watch it on playback, wanting to ask questions about so to get the context is critical, right? We're all being nudged, aren't we, to be critical thinkers, to not, everything's got a story behind it and context behind it to understand. But how do we have those types of what are we allowed to ask? How do we ask it? At what stage in the recruitment process should we have it? How do we have a non-judgmental conversation with a candidate who's disclosed or we're aware that has a conviction to give us that information to make a more objective decision.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing I would suggest to any employer is pick up the Hiring with Conviction guide that we've developed, because I think that's going to give them the foundation. That's going to give them the information to be able to say, okay, what are the questions that we need to be asking? What are the, what is the actual route or candidate journey that we need to be considering? So one of the things that you said there, Joe, around, when do we ask about convictions, for instance? There's an argument to say it could be asked at any part of that journey. Sometimes it's on the application form, which in my view, I don't see what difference that makes, other than it gives you an opportunity to bring in that unconscious or conscious bias.
Yeah.
But asking about that, asking when in that process somebody wants to or needs to make a disclosure, I think from a candidate perspective, if they understand when in that process that's going to happen, it removes that element of fear factor. Yeah. There's no element of surprise. They know, okay, this is when I've got to have that conversation. And part of the work that we do, that detailed work around disclosure, around what the women we support should be sharing, what they shouldn't be sharing, is really key. Because again, we understand what employers need to know to make those decisions. Yeah. But I think the message to employers, really, when you're sat in those interviews and you're interviewing somebody and you start that conversation around convictions, or you're having to hear a disclosure, I think first and foremost, just remember it's an actual person that's sat in front of you. Show that empathy, stay professional, and don't kind of lose focus on the purpose of the whole interview. And a really simple thing is watch your own body language. Be really careful of how, what visible reactions you're going to give. If somebody starts to read a disclosure and starts to disclose their conviction, you show complete shock on your face, or, as I've seen before, sometimes a hiring manager breaking into tears or getting quite emotional at what they're hearing, which again, are natural reactions, but you have to stay professional in that moment and make the candidate feel at ease. I think having to, even saying in that conversation, thanking them for being open and sharing that information is really key, because that's probably the most difficult conversation they're going to have with an employer. So I think it's making sure that you've got to create that space. You've got to create that kind of psychological safe space for somebody to be able to show their authentic self, which I think is really key.
I can, we were talking about the stats earlier. Did we say 1 in 4?
Yes.
1 in 4 people in the UK has some form of
England and Wales. Yeah.
In England and Wales, has some form of conviction. I'm just thinking about, like, if the very, very early stages. So I've been testing some recruitment processes recently, and seeing how many hoops you've got to jump through, before you even get to the, the submission stage. And some of those applications are asking that question right at the beginning, around convictions. And what kind of, I'm just thinking what a massive deselection point that could be to 1 in 4 potential candidates. How it was speaking to the women that you support, how are people responding to that? How does it impact their mindset during the application when they're reading that stuff right from the get-go?
I mean, I think that sets the stall out from an employer's perspective straight away. So as I said earlier, around bias, conscious or unconscious, there's an opportunity for bias to come in there. And I think, as a person applying for a job, if you're aware of that, is that going to put you off from applying? It will do. It'll deter some people from applying in the first place. And I think that whole inclusivity piece around job adverts and how you're trying to attract talent, sticking that on an application form is going to turn people off straight away. And I think it's, so I think, you've got to be really clear in those application processes, whether that's an application form, whether it's an online portal. If you're asking that question, I'd like to see, well, why are you asking that question? What difference does it make at this point? Because let's be honest, when you've interviewed...
At this point as well.
At that point, Hiring with Conviction breaks all this down in terms of all the different touch points where you can ask about convictions. Yeah. And, that there might be a case where, it may fit a little bit better in the earlier parts of those conversations. I think the biggest thing for me is be transparent about why you're asking for it.
Yeah.
You know, is there any reason why an employer can't share the candidate journey with a candidate? Very often, you'll see the job advert, you'll know the closing date, there may be an interview. Very often, you don't see what that candidate journey is going to look like. And for somebody with a conviction, knowing at what parts of that journey is somebody going to ask about the conviction? When is a decision going to be made? What happens when the DBS comes back? How does that employer manage risk? All those things are going through people's heads thinking, okay, right, I've got over one hurdle, but I'm waiting for the next one now. So it's just mapping out what that candidate journey looks like and being transparent can remove all of those fears very easily. And I think
that, sorry, Richard.
No, go on, Sally, all right.
Well, I was going to say, I think, listening to the both of you, I'm just hearing deselection. So the candidates are either deselecting themselves, or organisations are deselecting based off, unnecessary criteria. So I think it is something for us all to really take a step back on. And how do we make our processes, from a really tactical and practical perspective, more accessible? And so people aren't deselecting, and we're not using the wrong things as deselection methods. If we go back to skill-based hiring, which is essentially what we're all focusing on and what all TA teams are focusing on, because of the agility of skills that we are going to need as this new revolution of AI is coming into the workforce. What is it that we're looking for? We're looking for adaptability. We're looking for resilience. We're looking for, skills. I'm probably wrong. Maybe I'm wrong to assume, but I'm assuming these women have this in bucket loads in terms of the lived experience that they have, and actually using it as a real strength to be able to, demonstrate and take control of the narrative, as opposed to I'm sitting in front of you today with a conviction. And I think, when I think about some of the stories, Richard, that these women have had to endure, these are deeply personal things, deeply personal things. And being expected to share that in an interview scenario, I think it's a lot. I think it's a lot to ask. Because I think, having empathy and having compassion and actually assessing the necessity of knowing this information, I think is vitally important, because I think so many recruitment processes are baked with a tick box. I'm asking this question, I need to know this. Actually, I think we need to take a step back and try and question that a little bit more.
I think you're right. And I think in terms of women sitting in front of an employer and having that conversation, as you say, there's multiple barriers to getting a job in the first place. Forget convictions, but when you start to bring that in, and I think, we talk to employers a lot about risk and, whether or not somebody having a conviction, is it, in the first instance, is that a potential risk, and is it relevant to the job that they're going for? That's the first kind of part of the conversation, I suppose. Yeah. Because, you need to determine, do you need to do a DBS? And if you do a DBS, what level does it need to be at? And then importantly, what do you do with that information when it comes back? Again, candidate journey. What does that candidate expect when that DBS comes back? And I think it's because what we would say is, when the DBS comes back, there should be an opportunity there, a meaningful opportunity for the candidate to address any concerns that employer might have. Yeah. And again, that's where the context stuff really comes in.
And that transparency in the recruitment process that you were saying before, the clearly mapped candidate journey. I spent a large proportion of my career working in not just the charity sector, but education as well. And in education, every single one of my candidates, there was a process, a reference at the time, the List 99s and the DBS checks that were brought in. And it was very, very, it was very clear and fully transparent. We were all trained to have confident conversations with our candidates and our clients around this, because the searches went so deep that they were bringing up things, cautions from 30 years ago. They were bringing it, some of them had every historical for everybody. And we're talking about teachers, right? Teachers who have had lives before teaching. And we had that confidence. We took away the stigma. We broke down the barriers. It was part of the process. They were fully aware that was going to happen. They were fully aware that we were open to those conversations, that we'd been fully trained, and that us with the head teachers had the ability to be able to do a risk analysis and make objective decisions on the facts and, like you say, the risk assessment. And it was never an uncomfortable thing, because there was the expectation there.
Yeah, it is that. Yeah, go on, Sally.
I was just going to say, I really want to know, more about the charity. I mean, Joe and I focus so much of the work that we do on impact. Okay. And I just want to know more about the work that you do, how you get involved, how are you supporting these women, and what the impact is.
Yeah, that's the easy bit, I suppose. So I describe it as we walk alongside the women on their journey into work, because everything that we do goes hand in hand. We have a big part to play in there, but so does the woman coming through as well. So it's sitting down at that very early stage when they come to us. Potentially confidence is low, sometimes self-belief, sometimes they're coming in really confident, but it's really sitting down at that early point and assessing, okay, what do they want? What do they need? And when I say what do they need, that means what do they actually need, not what we think they need. Because think again, it's trying as much as we can to get somebody to come to us and tell us what their aspirations really are, not, well, this is what I think I should have because I've got a conviction. So, we'll do things like careers coaching very early on in the journey to try and determine, again, what is it they really want? If they've got a master's degree, why are they telling us that they just want a basic admin job? And it's trying to dig down into that a little bit. And I suppose, the team here are very confident in having those conversations to try and pull out of that. Okay, what does the candidate really want? What's gonna give them that stability? What's gonna get them out of bed every day and think, do you know what, this is the job I really want?
Can I ask, Richard, so I assume that a proportion of the women that you support they're deep into their careers, mid-career, they've got their qualifications, their education, industry experience. What is it, a confidence thing or an expectations thing? What makes somebody that's mid-career or at the top of their career who has a conviction then place themselves in that lower level, kind of maybe unskilled, or what gives them that kind of, why have they, I'm trying to find the language, why have they
underselling themselves?
That's it, Richard.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think there's a variety of reasons. It's not a one size fits all. I think confidence plays a massive part, self-belief. Mm-hmm. But again, if you think about some of the negative things in the background, people saying to them, look, you're never going to get a job, or you'll never go back into that job because you've got a conviction, you're going to have to start at the bottom. Not always the case. It depends what their experience is. And I think that's where it's really important, again, coming back to what we say to employers, you need to sit down with that individual and determine, have they got the skills and experience to do the job? The conviction stuff, that can be a conversation a little bit further down the line. If they're the right person for the job, then that's the conversation after you've made that conditional offer. So I think, we do lots of work around that careers coaching and looking at aspirations, but also trying to put a lens on it to say, what job should they, what level should they really be pitching themselves at? And having those conversations to try and tease that information out of the women coming through as well. Because I think, and when we get the feedback at the end of that, for somebody that's gone into a job where it might either be their dream job or it's on the pathway to where they want to be, I think there's got to be that, you've got to be able to kind of see that journey about where that could end up. And I think that's the really key bit. And I think, we have lots of conversations with employers. You mentioned the training earlier, Joe. We do lots of stuff with employers around how can they create that level playing field. So what we're not saying to any employer, you should give somebody with a conviction a job. What we're saying is create that level playing field and give them the chance to perform same as everybody else.
Yeah.
And actually, the feedback that we get, we had one recently, I'll not name the employer, but they were absolutely blown away. This candidate went in there fully prepared, had experience, had clearly done a homework, done lots of interview preparation, and actually just blew them away at interview. And the feedback wasn't that she was just great. The feedback was she was outstanding. She ticked every single box that they wanted. And at not one stage of that did the conviction need to be discussed. That was a conversation later. And it was a conversation around, okay, if there's any identified risks, what we're saying to employers is you should be doing everything to mitigate those risks, not the other way around, not putting those risks in place and thinking, okay, how can we reject somebody?
So is it fair to say then that you work kind of side by side in partnership with the females that are looking for employment, and you also walk kind of side by side in partnership with the employers in terms of education, upskilling TA teams?
Yep. I mean, we work with over 135 employers now. Wow. And it doesn't matter what size those organizations are. You know, we work with lots of very big, very reputable, very well-known brands, people like Virgin, Network Rail, KPMG, Amy Group, lots of those. But we work with tiny, small little charities as well. You know, charities that work, within the sector, people like Standout, some of the bigger charities like St. Giles Trust or Catch-22. But I think the theme that runs through all of them is they just want to hire people that are going to come in and do a great job.
Yeah.
The conviction is a secondary conversation. It's not the driver behind it. It's about them recognizing, actually, recruitment's expensive. If you've got to keep recruiting for roles over and over, you know this better than me, those costs are really expensive. You can bring somebody in that can do a great job, that doesn't want to leave and wants to stay and wants to progress and wants to build a career. Those costs start to come down. So there's a business case there for employers as well.
So, I mean, this is just about very, very good, inclusive and accessible recruitment, isn't it? And reducing the barriers that millions and millions and millions of candidates face through that intersectional lens. What are they kind of like, because everybody always wants practical, low-hanging fruit. What could I do this afternoon if I was to look at my recruitment process to make sure I haven't got any blind spots and that I'm not, that I'm kind of discouraging people unintentionally, especially people with convictions. What are the quick wins? If I was a TA professional, what could I do this week?
I think a number of things. I think first and foremost, again, use the Hiring with Conviction guide, because all of this advice is in there.
Where's that? Where can we find this?
It's readily available on our website. If you go to the employer section on the website, and the second iteration of that is coming out at the back end of January. So a new kind of revamped version, I suppose. But again, practical. It gives all the really practical guidance for employers to say, look, if you want to consider this, if this is something you've not done and you want to start building this in, this is where you can, this is your starting point. I think one of the things that you mentioned there, Joe, around one of the big things for me is getting that organizational culture right. So we work with all of those employers that we work with. We've had different people at different levels in the organization that have come to us originally. Sometimes the hiring manager, sometimes it's the leadership team, D&I leads, HR leads, all those different ones. But I think one of the common things is you've got to get people on the same page, because it's great the leadership team are driving this, but then the hiring managers hold their hands up and say, do you know what, we don't know how to do this, or we're not sure what to do. And that's where we can come in again. We can come in and help with that. We can come in and do that sense checking, I suppose, and say, look, is this fit for purpose? And I'll give you a really good example of this. We did some work not too long ago where we were looking at an organization's job adverts and how they're trying to attract people into the business. And when you think about inclusivity and think about how you're trying to attract people to even want to apply in the first place, when there's a line on an advert that says we conduct extensive background checks and no further information, women we support all day long are not applying for that job because it looks scary. We know what it is. We know it's things like social media checks, media checks. Again, transparency, soften the language, make it accessible. And I think, because all it's going to do is it's going to put people off and it'll stop them from applying. I think it's about, if you want to reach a particular demographic or a particular group, and we get employers coming to us asking this all the time around, how do we reach people with convictions? How do we get people in our local communities? Again, partner up with the right organizations then. People like us, other charities out there that can do this, because I think they may be missing out on particular people purely because of how they're advertising, where they're advertising.
Something as straightforward as a line in an advert, right?
Absolutely.
I think it is, but I think to the point that you made, Richard, it's I think there's kind of two sides of the same coin. Is that, yes, we want to be able to attract more representative talent, but it's creating that training for hiring communities who might not hire all the time. I think we can safely say that a lot of talent acquisition teams would be upskilling in this area, or you'd like to hope so, in terms of accessible, equitable and inclusive recruitment. But what we tend to see is then when it kind of gets to line manager level, all this good intention and effort kind of falls off a cliff. And I think that's no fault of their own, but they haven't been given the tools that they need to kind of create these really psychologically safe spaces. They don't, like you say, know how to react when they're listening to information and be able to be professional and neutral in an interview situation. And then, if we think about some of these other barriers that these women are facing in terms of, poverty, coming from a low socioeconomic background, having childcare challenges, there's a lot more support, I think, that needs to be given in terms of creating psychologically safe spaces and flexible spaces in order for individuals to be able to thrive in the workplace. So I think it's, we need to be attacking this from several different levels, don't we, in different directions.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think creating that psychologically safe environment in that interview process is really key. Again, you want somebody to sit in that interview and really show you their true, authentic self.
Yeah.
It sounds a real cliche, but it's not. Again,
and there is an art to it. Good interviewing techniques, body language, tone of voice, all of that stuff. And I think we don't give our hiring managers enough care and attention, do we? We don't coach them enough. We don't train them enough to get really comfortable with interviews. A lot of the time it's something that it's 2% of their day job, right? So they're not giving the skills and confidence to be able to do that. And, they struggle at the best of times. And so, being approached with a conversation about a conviction, that's even harder for some of them to navigate, which is why I'm so passionate about the training and education side. I know the hiring with convictions is just the start, isn't it? The relaunch of that. And there's going to be some really, really interesting work that's going to be coming from you as an organization, and the actual on the ground stuff that you do with employers and hiring managers. What can we expect next year, Richard?
I mean, in terms of training and consultancy, once we relaunch Hiring with Conviction in January, we'll be really stepping up the training and consultancy, because I think, and not just because it's to support hiring with conviction. It's actually because employers are asking for it. I think the feedback we get from hiring with conviction is that it's a great door opener. It's a great way to start those internal conversations. And I think, again, if you've got hiring managers, you've got HR, you've got D&I, you've got leadership, if all of those are coming at this from a different perspective and they're not on the same page and that culture's not quite there, that's the bit that we can help with. We've done training for organizations where we'll bring the recruitment team, the onboarding team, the D&I leads, bring them all together in that kind of round table format, I suppose, to really understand, okay, where are the issues? Where are the perceived issues? Where are the bits around gaps in knowledge, for instance? And talking a little bit more about, about the sector in general, about women in the sector, and getting them to actually really understand this is the reality, not this that you might have seen in the media or in the news. So I think that hiring with conviction is merely the door opener to the start of the conversation, really. I think allowing somebody like us to come in objectively and really sense check your candidate journey. What does that really feel like for somebody that's going to come through there? So even down to those little bits in those adverts, as we say, that one-liner that could completely turn off a whole cohort of people just because the language is wrong.
Absolutely. So what are our final takeaways then? We've got some really kind of practical advice. We've got some amazing free resources that are launched and are going to be relaunched in terms of what organizations can do. What would be, I don't know, your kind of, your key takeaway or piece of advice, Richard, that you would leave our audience with?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one, get your processes out there and visibility, transparency. But the caveat to that is do what you say on the tin. There's no point in advertising we're great, we do this, we're inclusive, and then you don't follow the processes because you will come unstuck. Organizations like us will pick up on that. Candidates will pick up on that and won't apply again. But I think from a business perspective, and this doesn't matter whether this is a huge corporate, tiny little charity, makes no difference. All of them just want to hire the best person for the job. And again, let's be honest, if you don't get that right and you're constantly recruiting, it affects your bottom line. Again, whether you're a charity or you're a corporate. So I would say, cast the net wide, embrace that inclusivity, but focus on bringing in the right person that's got the right skills, and don't focus on somebody's past. And I think if you get that right and you broaden the perspective a little bit, you might open the door to unexpected talent that you just, in a million years you weren't expecting. And the results of that might surprise you in a really positive way.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah. What about you, Jo?
I think for me, it's what my whole education journey around criminal convictions and people that have, returning citizens, people that have spent time in prison. It's, for whatever reason, I'd kind of put it in a different category of my life that's a thing that happens to a small group of other people. And actually, the more and more that I've stepped into that, unlearning all of that and educating myself, is that, if we think about the number of people in England and Wales with a conviction, this is not a small minority of people. And I could make my life could change tomorrow, or I could do something tomorrow that could change the fact that I currently don't have a conviction. And so this is not an other people issue.
No.
This is an us challenge. This is an us issue to support with. And I don't think that really it can be if we're fully committed to inclusion and inclusive skills-based hiring, we need to make sure that we're also considering convictions and making sure that we're getting rid of any unnecessary barriers. It's got to be part of what we do. We can't just make things accessible for people who are neurodivergent or people with families or people with disabilities. We've got to think about this community because it's massive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I'm probably going to be a bit more controversial for a change. There's such a narrative out there in terms of we need more women in, women in tech, women in energy, women in STEM. And so many businesses are facing this same challenge. We can't get women to come and do our jobs.
You sound fatigued by that, Sally.
Sorry?
You sound fatigued by that.
Yeah, do you know what? I'm exhausted. I'm absolutely exhausted because what we don't see, is no one trying to tackle the systemic challenges that women face. And so I would be asking and challenging every business, what is the skill shortage that you've got? Right, and how do we make those skills more accessible to women?
Yeah,
right? I mean, 2 birds, 1 stone.
Just to pick up on that, Sally. I mean, we see that a lot with businesses coming to us saying, women are underrepresented in the business. We need more women through the door. My question every time is, but what are you going to do differently to do that? Yeah. And a response from one was, well, we're going to put an advert up in the job centre. Great, but I think you need to go a little bit further.
But we will have used the gender decoder. Right, so that's going to have made all the difference.
Yeah, I tell you what. Why didn't you put? This is a crazy idea. Why didn't you invest some money in reskilling women who are coming out of, who have got criminal convictions to come and do the work that you need them to do? There's a radical, crazy idea, but not in my view, not enough investment is given at this kind of skilling, reskilling, upskilling stage of the skills that we need in the workplace. And there are so many talent pools. And what I like about that notion is that everyone's starting off on the same footing, right? Everyone's here to learn a new skill, to gain something else, to kind of future-proof the business. We're all in it together, as opposed to I'm doing you a favor, right? Which is where a lot of this kind of narrative around underrepresented groups is, again, something I'm completely fatigued at. We're not doing anyone a favor, okay? We're trying to future-proof our businesses and trying to take, society with us. So I think there are some kind of more innovative, I can even use that word, solutions to the problems that we're all facing. And I think if you go back to those initial stats, 12.6 million, 1 in 4, the 23 billion it's costing us as an economy, surely we can start rewriting the rules and start really tackling this at systemic, at a systemic level, I think is where I'm going with this.
Love it. I would have clapping emoji.
Clap myself for that one. I need something to eat. I'm hungry.
Put the a link to the Hiring with Convictions in the show notes, and that's been republished in January as well, Richard.
End of January.
Where do we follow all of that great stuff? How do we make sure that we're currently we're in the know and we're following all this work that you're doing and all these great resources?
I would keep an eye on follow Working Chance on LinkedIn, get on our website, sign up to the newsletter, because you'll get all that all that great information around some of the work that we're doing that's kind of going off in the background.
I don't know if I'm even signed up to the newsletter.
You're missing the trick, Joe. Come on. No, I can sign up to those, but I think my final message to employers is, look, just come and talk to us. There's no obligation. Come and have a chat with us. Let us have a look at where you're up to. Let us have a look at what issues you're having. And I think, the key for me is getting that culture internally is really important. If you can get the culture right, a lot of that stuff there is very simple to do. It's not complicated, but it is complicated when you've got people pushing and pulling on different ideas or different mindsets and not really getting it. If you can get people on the same page, the work actually becomes a lot simpler to do.
I think there's a real kind of social impact and social sustainability focus, an angle that we could take on this as well, in terms of, if you're in an area in England and Wales that has got potentially higher crime rates and higher convictions, we can be working as a community to really try and tackle some of these challenges and, decrease the risk of reoffending, improve the lives of women who have received convictions off the back of abuse, off the back of, poverty, off the back of coercive control. These are real issues that women are facing. And actually, if we can come in as organisations to intervene some of this work, to start breaking these cycles, the impact is insurmountable, isn't it, in terms of what this work can actually do. This shouldn't just be a program or initiative. This is something we should be embedding into the societies our businesses are based in.
And I agree. And I think, look, if we're waiting for the criminal justice system to get its together, we're going to be here like forever and a day. We have to remember that convictions in prison is big, big money, right? Mm-hmm. Might be controversial for me to say, but it is, right? And I think that if we're waiting for that to change, we'll be waiting, forever and a day. So I do think this is an opportunity for us again to step up as, corporate community, businesses, employers.
I think I'll throw a stat in there for you actually right at the end, because I think you mentioned, social impact there, social value, Sally. Mm-hmm. So organisation called Social Value Portal, I'm sure you've heard of, who measure social impact. Within the new version of Hiring with Conviction, there'll be a figure in there where they've said a company can create almost £56,000 in social value by hiring one person with a conviction.
Wow. That's incredible, Richard. That is incredible.
And that's just one person.
One hire. Wow. That's giving me goosebumps. That's impact. And we're obsessed with the measuring impact. Of course we are. But there you go. There's your impact. 56
Get that on your website.
Thank you so much for your time. I've learned loads. I'm always really interested to just learn more about the work that can be done, practical work that can be done in this space, and obviously the impact, which is why we're all here. But it's been really insightful and actually really inspiring. So thank you so much for your time, Richard. And thank you, Joe, for bringing Richard. And congratulations for being an ambassador. That's blooming incredible. I'm inspired.
I've got to put the shift in now, though. I've got to do
now the work begins.
Well, thank you both. Thank you,
nice to see you both.
Joined us and watching us back online, and go and do some work. This is incredible stuff. So thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Take
See
care.
you later.